the day prior to our banquet tonight. Tickets are still on sale for our banquet. Our speaker is Dr. Gloria J. Brown Marshall, who is an author, a playwright, a legal commentator who has appeared on CNN, NPR, BBC, WVON, literally all the letters. She has been on there. She is a really big deal to come to Natchez and discuss her book, A Protest History of the United States. So if you haven't had a chance to buy a ticket yet, I hope that you will. But now I have the joy of introducing Allison Pelegrin. Allison Pelegrin is the recipient of fellowships and grants from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Louisiana Board of Regents, the Foundation for Louisiana, and the Academy of American Poets. Allison's two most recent poetry collections are Our Lady of Bewilderment and Waterlines, both with the LSU Press. Her work has appeared in the Southern Review, the Missouri Review, and the Best American Poetry 2025. While serving as Louisiana Poet Laureate from 2023 to 2025, she founded the Lifelines Poetry Project, and her poetry outreach in prisons continues to this day. And that's going to be primarily what she's going to discuss with us, is how she does these poetry workshops in the prison system in Louisiana, which is another kind of freedom altogether. So I'm very excited about that. She's also the writer-in-residence at Southeastern Louisiana University. So please welcome Allison Pelegrin.
Thank you so much for that introduction. It's so nice to be here in such great company. And thank you all for sticking around for the last presentation. I know I'm supposed to do poetry, and I will, I promise. But the theme of the conference coincides so well with the work I started doing in prison that I wanted to talk about that, so that we could talk about, I guess, a different type of freedom or a different kind of freedom. So the funny thing is I don't know how to use this.
Center.
There we go. Okay. I just press it forward. That's me. That's my name. And here, okay, this is me in the prison library at Louisiana State Penitentiary. It's known as Angola. And it coincides actually with all of the speakers that we've heard today. I heard Dr. Smith talking about agriculture and food this morning. Angola is on an 18,000-acre former plantation. If you have the misfortune of arriving there as a resident, your first job is going to be on the field lines, where you will work tending to crops, and the only time you don't work is if it's too hot for the horses, and that's a true fact, sadly. We heard from Dr. Coleman, who's still here, about the quilting and the beautiful work that she does with these beautiful quilts. There's a quilting ministry at Angola as well. The men who work in the hospice care for the other men who are dying there in that environment raise money for their mission by selling, creating these beautiful quilts and then selling them to raise money. And then Dr. Sapp was here talking about sports and segregation. Those are things that go on there as well, obviously. There's a traveling boxing league, which I did not know. It's a very big deal. But then also some of the uglier sides of freedom and the lack of it arise there. So where does poetry fit into all of this? Well, it's because poetry is the place where you can't be governed, you can't be kind of told what to do. So when I was poet laureate and I was invited to go there, I said, sure. You know, I didn't know what to expect. I couldn't imagine what I had to offer this particular group, just because I understood, or I thought I understood, the severity of the situation in which they found themselves. But I'm really a little disappointed in myself for that initial reaction, because of course what we shared was poetry. That's what we had in common. And on my first arrival to Angola, there's never any pictures of this, by the way, because you're not allowed to bring in your phone or your camera or anything, so you just have to trust my testimony when I'm up here. And this is from their newspaper photographer. But when you arrive there, it was like black and white almost. Everything just seemed black and white. There's not a lot going on. The landscape's flat. I mean, it's in Louisiana, right? But I walk into the prison library, and it was like Wizard of Oz, you know, the color world, all of a sudden, because all the poets were in there, and all the books were in there, and they had carrot cake and coffee and chairs at the table, you know, and I just walked in. I was best friends with everybody, just like I am at any other poetry event. And so I guess what I learned in my first instant was that those concerns I had about how I wouldn't be able to connect with this group or something, that was just out of the window. We were all people who loved poetry, and we were poets together. I had been kind of having some gentle pressure from, and I forgot to put a title, I apologize. So in poetry, we just call it untitled. Okay, so it'll be untitled. I had been having some pressure, not negative pressure, but I was being encouraged to think of something I wanted to do with the platform they kept telling me I had as poet laureate. And I was like, well, thinking to myself, I don't really like book clubs and all that kind of stuff. That's a little boring to me. So it's when I was standing in this library eating a piece of carrot cake out of a nacho tray, looking at sparrows hopping in and out of razor wire, I thought, this is exactly the place that poetry should be, and this is something people should be talking about. It's something people should know about. And so kind of in that instant, I started thinking of what I could do. And the answer is, you gotta have money, okay, so that you can get these things done. And that was actually kind of easy to do. That's how I got the funding. I got a $50,000 fellowship from the Academy of American Poets to support that work. So the financial support is easy. And partly I think that's because poetry is cheap. It doesn't cost a lot, you know. And the other thing is because this sounds so good on paper. When you say, yes, I'm going to go do poetry workshops inside of carceral facilities and blah, 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 it sounds really great on paper. What I was not prepared for as I undertook this work was how difficult it was going to be to actually make it happen. I mean, I didn't know until I started trying to do it that you don't just call up a prison and ask to speak to the warden so that you can schedule a poetry workshop. It's not how it works, okay? You can call, you can leave messages, they don't call you back, and all this type of stuff. So I started having to lean into connections that I had or that I could make with people who did other work inside of the prison system and kind of get my way in that way. So in this picture with me are two of the people who were a huge help, and I'll leave the mic just for a second. Here's one, and here's the other. This is the one let's see, it's on your left. The woman on your left is Dr. Marianne Fisher Giorlando. She's a retired criminal justice professor from Grambling University, and for decades she has worked to educate her students, no matter what side of the equation they end up working on, to understand how the prison system works and how to navigate their own conduct inside that system. So she was a wonderful help. And then the other woman is Faye Talbot, who's the librarian at Angola, and she's just, you gotta love the prison librarians because they just make stuff happen, okay? If we need to get books in, I'll give them to her, put them in her trunk, she gets them in, you know, it's all kinds of stuff. So you gotta have friends like that that can help you make these things happen and make introductions to you. So I spent a lot of time worrying about how I would make that happen, but ultimately I was able to do it. So I was able to travel to prisons all over the state, and I also brought with me, whenever I could find someone to come, another poet. And we would go into these spaces, often in a library, maybe a classroom, sometimes the chapel, which is always a multi-use space inside of a prison, and we would just sit in a circle and do the age-old thing that poets do, which is to read poems and to talk about poems. So it's a lot of work on the front end to make it happen and to get your body into the space. But then when I'm in the space, it's more, my responsibility becomes more just to kind of get out of the way and to let things happen with the poems that are going to happen. I had another intention or another goal as I was establishing this program. And I wanted the poems that I was talking about inside of the prisons and the prompts that we were writing from, I wanted them to be appropriate for kids of all ages too in schools, because part of my mission was to reach out into communities that were either impacted by the justice system or not. And I also wanted to open up that dialogue about how, you know, we can all arrive to these poems from wherever we are in life or whatever age we are or whatever our background is, and come away with ideas and writing and things like that. So I have a website, and if any of you all are educators and you're interested in using this stuff, and just reach out to me and I'll send you everything I have, because you can bring it into any classroom, it's totally fine, okay? There's no F-bombs, nothing like my book, okay? It's all, I'm just kidding. But it's all totally fine, and you can use it with any age. I learned to get permission for everything I wanted to bring. And so I had really good luck bringing in packs of index cards that were sealed, because they're sealed and they don't have stuff in them, okay? So I was allowed to bring that. Pens, sometimes not. Sometimes they want to count the pens and then, you got to count them again at the end. Some places are more relaxed, it just depends. Loose leaf paper, approved books. For my first trip to Angola, I was allowed to bring one book, and I agonized over it. I couldn't decide what to bring, what would this group want. And so I brought a book of poetry prompts, and then on all the blank pages in that book, between chapters or whatever, I just copied poems. And I left that in the library, so I know it's still there somewhere. This is a book called The Sentences That Create Us. It's from the Penn Center, and it's about how you can go about creating a writing life while incarcerated. And the Penn Center gave me hundreds of these books. I had boxes of them everywhere in my house. And every place that I went, I got approval to bring these books, and they were distributed not only to the people who chose to participate in the workshop, but sometimes I was allowed to leave extras for the library. Sometimes more people want to participate than are allowed in the space. There's, you can imagine how that would be a pretty strict setting. But anyway, hundreds of these books. I just only stopped tripping over boxes of these books in my house. And then I went to another book, which I forgot to bring up here, but it's an anthology of poetry called You Are Here, Poetry in the Natural World. Because, when you're in a prison, naturally you're thinking about space and about what you can make inside of your space, whether it's a solitary cell, if you're in segregation from the rest of the population, or the only yard that you're allowed to travel in, or whatever it is. What I found among the people I've had the privilege to work with inside of the prisons is that they have a way of remaking the world so that they can expand inside of it. And that's one of those cases where the teacher is learning from the student, right? I'm learning things from this group that I should be able to adopt into my own life. In the book I forgot to bring up here, there's a poem that ends with a line called, and the line is, "Here is a man worth falling on." It's a poem about the rain, okay? And so I wrote up all this stuff. I brought the book, brought copies to the group at Angola, and one of the men in the group just jumped in on that line, and they had a lot to say about being worthy of rain falling on. And they kind of caused me to reframe my whole way of looking at the world, and so it was an impact that followed me outside of the prison, because on my way home after our workshop, I'm on the 20-mile road that, leads just to the prison. It's one lane in each direction. There's no nothing really. There's like a fire station and a church or something. There's nowhere to pull off or anything like that. And there was somebody in a pickup truck just riding my tail the whole time. Mm-hmm. Like, I was just like, could you pass me? I can't get out of the way. It was even too dangerous, I guess, for him to pass. And in my brain, I'm using my poet skill of coming up with all these names and things I'm going to say to this person and blah, 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 blah. Okay? And then we finally I'm dying for a soft drink too. I'm dying of thirst. So finally, when I had a gas station, I pull over. And guess who else is pulled over at the gas station? This person I said I was going to strangle or whatever when they were riding on my tail. And part of it is I chickened out, but the other part of it is I was thinking of what Marcella said, which is that's a man that rain's worth falling on too, So I've learned from these people as well. These are some of the easier things we did inside of the prisons. We did a recycling haiku. That's an exercise the group really liked, and I'll read one of mine to you so you can see what it's like. They also really responded to deathbed poems from the Japanese poets, and a lot of those are in the form of haiku. For example, here's one, I can't remember the author, but the poem ends, "Lately, when I've said my prayers, I've meant it." And in that context, it has a different meaning than someone just saying, oh, this is a cool few lines. So those worked well, making it count. Whenever I visit a prison, the whole thing is bookended by the count, which is when everything stops and everyone who is a resident there has to line up and be counted. And if there's a mistake with the count, everybody's on lockdown in place. Even visitors, you're just stuck in place until they decide that the count's cleared, and then that's it. I've had 2-hour visits eaten up so that there's only 45 minutes left because there was a problem with the count, okay? So the count is always on the mind, and we did some list poems thinking about that. And then, of course, the poetry of departures as well. You leave the world behind at the gate, right? But then also the world, it comes to you and then it's leaving you behind. We were thinking about departures and things. I have tons of prompts. They did great with them. And these are some of the poems. This is a poem of departure, and you can hopefully see that it's on the index card. And let me explain to you the index cards. They're easy for me to bring in, and I'm allowed to do that. And also, often the men and women like to share their poems so that I can share them on the outside. And if that's the case, they just give me the poem. And so I have a box filled with these index cards with poems, and some of them are so moving, and I can just hear the voices of the people who wrote them, because they like to share them in the group. So I can just hear all these voices in my head. I know that sounds bad, but it's in a good way. And I don't know if you can read this guy's writing. I won't read the whole thing, but he says he's using anaphora in the poem, so each stanza is beginning with the same phrase, may you this, may you this, may you this. And his inspiration here is the poem Blessing the Boats by Lucille Clifton. And the way the poem ends is, may you touch the Atlantic, but remember the lake, the ground that holds your mother, not forget us, not me. And then I have his name blocked out because I've decided to do that in all of these cases. This is a poem based on a haiku I was telling you about. So the haiku is by Basho. Am I messing this up? No, it's Basho. Even in Kyoto, hearing the cuckoo cry, I long for Kyoto. I love this poem, and I threw it out to a group, and I said, does anybody want to say anything about this poem? And everybody's got all these ideas. And one guy says, yeah, I know that poem. I know what that's about. It's about being homesick when you're already home. And I was thinking, yes, that's pretty much perfect. Okay. So I don't know who said that. I don't know the name of the person who said that. And then I don't remember off the top of my head the name of the person who wrote this poem. I don't know if it's the same. But he's kind of doing the same thing. Even in the cypress swamp, hearing the hoot of the owl, I long for the sounds of my youth. The tapping of the red-headed woodpecker against a tree, sitting in a pirogue, absolutely free. This was in a chapel. We were sitting in a chapel in the dark writing these poems. And here's another one. This is my favorite. Even in life, hearing the laughter of others, I long for life. And just all that white space on the rest of the card, that's the utterance. So hearing this and having it shared with me, it feels like it's got to go out into the world, right? So one thing I decided to do was to make up a list of, or to make up some cento sonnets. In poetry, a cento is a work that's made up with lines from other works. That's all it consists of. So the creator of the cento, in this case me, is simply taking source material, in this case, lines written by people who are incarcerated in Louisiana, and then just mining them for something, making poems. So I'll share some of those with you in a minute. And I even have posters. If anybody's really interested, I can give you some. I told you this, told you that. Here's the cento sonnets. And I'll tell you the inspiration, because if you're a teacher and you want to use this in your classroom as an exercise, I want to tell you where I got the idea from. In that book I showed you, The Sentences That Create Us, there's a chapter on every genre, poetry, fiction, nonfiction, journalism, graphic novels, everything. And in the poetry chapter, there's a poem by Terrence Hayes. It's from his book called American Sonnets for My Past and Future Assassin. So guess what? That's a book of sonnets. And in that book of sonnets, each of the sonnets has that same title. So it's American Sonnet for My Past and Future Assassin. Every poem has that title. So you've got to tell them apart by their first lines. And the one that's in the book I told you about begins with the line, I lock you in a sonnet that is part prison. And so you can imagine how the people I'm speaking with in prisons, they hook on that immediately. And you'll see echoes of that in the cento I'll share with you. So that's where I got the idea of patchwork. In Hayes's book, he doesn't have a table of contents because all of the poems have the same title, but he has an index, and the index is arranged as a sonnet crown. So he's got all of the titles of the poems, but the titles also make a poem. Okay, so it's quite an intricate construction that he's made. And so I had all of that in my brain when I came up with this idea. So here are some of these centos. These beautiful posters these were made, these exist because I had that money from the Academy of American Poets. And because of that fellowship, I also had a community partner. My community partner was the New Orleans Poetry Festival. And we culminated with a big event last year at the New Orleans Poetry Festival. And the day before that event, I was able to bring a group of 8 poets into Angola where we gave a poetry reading to the poetry group and then to any other members who wished to attend. It was a great event. I have no pictures, but it was awesome. And I also was able to bring them copies of these posters too, which they were thrilled about. So I'll read one to you. And again, each of these lines comes from a poem by an incarcerated writer. I'm just trying to make something new out of it. The clock can't save me from this prison sonnet. Let me stand and smile. Will listening unlock the mystery? My mind is stuck on one page. Today I'm feeling dark and want no one to see me. Hurting people can lose hope here behind these walls. Part prison, part daycare center. Dreaming of the cool grass. The spatters of rain have nowhere to be. I am the private thought made public. It is coming. I can feel the wind blowing on my face, the drums of my heartbeat. Troubles will be over soon. I hope it gives me rest. I am nobody. I see myself in you. I skipped ahead when I was telling you about the book, here it is, You Are Here, Poetry in the Natural World. This is a work I'm doing with One Book, One New Orleans, and that we have the money to bring 3 different poets into prisons across the state. My trunk is now full of copies of this book because this is the one we have the money to bring everywhere. And it's a really great book. And again, all of the prompts that we made, and I say we, that's Megan to my right in the picture, and then on the left is Adam Clay. Adam Clay is a professor at LSU, and we are working now, Adam and I, to make a nonprofit of lifelines so that we can deliver sustained poetry and creative writing workshops to prisons across the state and compensate the writers who will be doing that work, because we can't go everywhere ourselves all the time. It's not possible. This is us having barbecue after, and that's me, Adam, and then Michael Kleber Diggs, who's one of the poets we were able to bring. This was on this day we had just visited the women at LCIW. That's the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women. They're in a new facility. They had been dislocated for more than 10 years after a flood, and they were just getting into their new facility. Yes. So that was that day. The end of that. And now we'll do what I'm supposed to do, which is poetry. Okay. So I told you about those haiku-inspired poems. I thought I would read one to you. And you'll recognize the title, even though you've never heard it before. Even in Gretna, hearing the cashier talk, I long for Gretna. Coasting into my old world to help Mom pick up the house she can't sell for nothing, rimmed as it is with trash and canals threatening to overflow. I get a taste for the red drink of my youth, and when the cashier at the gas station lets slip the drawl of my people, most of them scattered elsewhere or to the grave, I could sob. Peacock talk, purposely showy and slow. Anytime I'd hit the twang, Mom got angry because I was letting my Gretna show. She threatened a face slap or a taste of soap, and I circled on a red bike, just out of reach. I'm going to read a poem that's called, I actually forgot what it's called. It's called Hot Sauce. I actually forgot what it's called. But the story, I'll tell you the story of it. It is called Hot Sauce Shrine. I live in Covington near Abita Springs in Louisiana, and there's this great artist named John Preble who has kind of made this meandering art museum. It started with an old gas station and just kind of goes everywhere. And he has things like fake taxidermy. So he's got a dog-a-gator. It's an alligator and a dog and a bass-a-gator. He's got a trailer, one of those Airstream trailers, you know, but it's staged to look as though a UFO has crashed in it and there's aliens inside. It's really unusual. And he also made a house out of hot sauce, which is where the title comes from. I used to be a high priestess of tail feather feel-good mumbo-jumbo. Naysayer extraordinaire cobbling together some crazy quilt catechism to cling to as I tangled in the world's thorns, frantic, fearing the chills soon to come. I haven't turned holy roller or handler of snakes, but things change slowly or all at once. Maybe it was when I drove through a dust devil and inhaled its grit of cut grass and cigarette butts. I've taken to praying since the whirlwind shook me loose, or anyway I dip my head at stoplights until I get distracted by scenery or birds, and the prayers come out confused. I'm clueless. My angel of place smokes blunts and speaks to me in bug bite braille. I know to visit St. Roch and turn his statue to the wall, but I hunger for alone time on an island with an organ that plays itself, or to whisper all my secrets to the hot sauce shrine. I read that the world is a dream of God, and now I don't know what to do with my hands. The world is God's dream, and I am a sparrow passing through song and the brass glow of fire. Or maybe that's wrong, and I'm trapped inside, stunned against the glass or down the chimney, terrified of kind hands that sweep me to the door. When I wake, I'm walking the moonlit labyrinth with wet feet, and the birds are quiet because I have terrified them with the thunder of my stumbling. O God of everything that creeps, I light a candle and ask my question. Is it pilgrimage enough if I spend my life remembering the few seconds I was a bird? I have sonnets on the brain just because I'm a poet is part of the reason, but also we were talking about the American sonnets and sonnet crowns and all of that. So I'm going to read to you a sonnet crown, which is a set of interlocking sonnets. You'll hear it. And I got to sip up because I'm not going to get a break for about 4 minutes. This is called Prison Crown. When time is up, there is no ceremony, just an escort to the prison museum where they sell shot glasses that boast Angola, a gated community. This is where reporters wait for pardons to happen or not, where the freed emerge shouldering their duffels, and pilgrims hold prayer vigils or pose grinning in the old electric chair. Remember teacher's bad joke on test day? Abandon all hope? Here, it's real. There are pearly gates, and then there's this guillotine for cars, the slow motion thumb up or down. Once through, you either gawk or lapse into the sing-along silence of back roads. It takes driving in silence on back roads while eating a hot dashboard banana for me to settle after prison class. It's too much. The gas station's wall of drinks, when I've listened without flinching to men who've wrestled language after solitary into poems about dawn. Its blinding reach, how far you have to dig to find your worth. What does it mean to look up from these thoughts outside the town of slaughter? Afternoon, but me with morning on the mind because someone asked about Obads. A day you hate to see coming was the answer I gave to a question he held inside for months. Here's a question I've held inside for months. This woodcut from the prison rodeo, this butterfly bought from a man behind a fence, its swallowtail outline painted in foamy green in spots, Luna moth-esque, with wings drawn from memory. This made thing, a creature somehow better than the real? Who etched it and how? I've heard the woodwright's shop turns assembly line to meet demands for trinkets outsiders might one day buy to mark their visit to the wildest show in the South, giving the maker a proxy freedom, a mounted life of dust and dreams of sky, that threadbare chambray washed to white. In skies of threadbare chambray washed to white, not much changes. The landscape held in place by routine, marked by navigation routes of men shuffling between duty and dorm. Maybe because you can't predict the bird, plain sparrows sipping from the mist that's pooled in concrete worn to rebar, threading nests in razor wire, that they excite a flicker of interest. Black-throated, commonplace, free. Without the birds, no matter what the sun displays, the world is gray. Sparrow antics, sporadic blips on flat-line days, unleash a lightness at the window, in the yard. No feather of beauty gone to waste. No fluff of anything is wasted here. Witness the flex pen's metamorphosis, the artist coaxing landscapes from cardboard and homemade gouache. Inspired by pacing the shrunken borders of dormitories with monastic discipline so that days and years are gone, replaced by what, it seems, can only be called devotion. Witness the violinist on her mission trip performing for a death row audience. The men in hospice cared for by lifers who moonlight making quilts to mark the passage of those unclaimed beyond their natural lives, buried within and pinned in place by crosses. Some sentences are marked with white crosses, life and what comes after. The world of dew is just the world of dew. And yet, on the main walk, my warden escort points his finger at a trustee in a jumpsuit, says, "Let's ask this fellow if he'll sing for us." And he does, with feeling, amazing grace, rocking to his toes for the higher notes, for a moment ungoverned by the ground. Redemption is a lazy word, but what do you call a shift that quakes inside the self? A new man soldered from scrap. Don't we all desire the life of arrows aimed skyward? The falling, yes, but before that, the flight. Sometimes the falling happens first, then flight, but only if you manage to survive the degradations put in place. The food, the heat, the count, the self gone dim, on hold. Is it a game of faith, believing what you have is what you want? A fellowship of faded men, and in a lockbox, pages copied so often they're a sacred text. When meeting inmates and the dogs they train, teenagers on a scared straight visit despair to see the ages of man off kilter. The faces of could-be fathers, of elders asking permission. So many questions, but when time is up, there is no ceremony. I know that one's heavy, so I'll read something funny now about my alcoholic father, okay, if you're ready. But it really is funny. And I always like to read a poem about my dad. Oh God, I cleared the room. I always like to read a poem about my dad because he's not here, but he's with me, and there's so many things I wish I could tell him. Also, it helps, before I read this poem, if I remind everybody about the greatest store on earth, which was called Wicks and Sticks. Anybody? No? It was a candle store in the malls of the 70s and 80s, and if you needed a candle that was shaped like a unicorn on a waterfall and a rainbow with rocks and shells taped to it, that you would go to Wicks and Sticks and you could buy it there. If I use the word LARP, do you know that as live action role play? Yeah. Okay. So this is called sucker. I was a sucker for my daddy, an addict at heart, always hooked on something. Drambuie, the cabbage soup diet, Cajun dancing, hauling Yankees on the tour bus up and down River Road to ogle whitewash plantations. He once larked the vampire Lestat rising from a grave because he was a sucker for Anne Rice. He was a sucker for Wicks and Sticks, specifically candles shaped like Buddha, and apartment living after his divorces. He went hook, line, and sinker for self-help, especially Dianetics. And though his toenails blackened, he ran across the longest bridge in the world. Twice. Then he took up ballroom dancing. He was the world's best drunk, and after he dried out, he was a sucker for AA. He was a sucker for fathering offshoremen bailed from the drunk tank, for naming these chain-smoking men my uncles, the women my aunts. Life became a potluck of talking through the night while the kids slept in cars, except for me. I was a sucker for sitting under the fig tree behind the Camel Club, thinking no one could see me study him, golden-haired and calm, everyone's father but mine. A sucker for calm, for burnt coffee and all-nighters, for not looking away when sobriety's atoms named the worst horrors of their lives. I'll end with this, and then you can ask me questions if you want. This is called Apology. Why did I pretend to hate bunking at Rosaryville for band camp? My fixation on whitewashed Jesus in the Sisters' Cemetery was uncool. I pretended to choose that path so I could sneak cigarettes and conjure my pranks in peace. My grandfather taught me to rub a bar of soap over my double-socked toes And thanks to that hack, I could march forever in my majorette boots. He also trained me in Marine Corps hijinks. It was my pleasure to muffle a trumpet solo, to hop out of step on purpose and keep it up for miles, just to see the sisters scowl. I loved Mardi Gras, the parades, mammoth breasts painted with faces, the crowd adorning me and my horn with beads that looked like fun-loving rosaries. When I made up things to tell the priest they sent in to hear confessions, more than the lies, my intent was to make him feel useful. I was clueless then, and only a few years removed from having tangible regrets, like that night in a honky-tonk when I struck a match on my zipper to keep a creep at bay. I knew my plan backfired when he leaned in and whispered, "Hot pants." These days, it's so true, it's so sad. These days, drink in hand, I boogie when the marching bands pass. I don't know exactly what I'm sorry for, but it's bothered me my whole life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Allison. Who has questions?
Thank you so much for that. I had a question about, I loved all of the poems, and thank you for reading them. From the first part of your presentation about your work in Angola, you made some mention of being able, alongside the index cards and everything else, to bring in approved books. You know, an anxiety I have that I'm sure is shared across the room is about book bans and what exactly approved books are. I was wondering if you've ever had any issues of a book you wanted to bring in, I think especially, of poets who, you know, like an Ethridge Knight or a Tahimba Jess, who write about places like Parchment and Angola, you know, honestly.
I'd love to bring Tahimba Jess to Angola.
Okay.
That's on my list of things to do. But
have you ever had any like issues, like a book that was not approved, is the question?
No. And so when I do, like, it's like asking your parents for permission. Like, you know which parent you're asking, and then you know what argument to make to that individual. Okay. So if I say, you know, I wanted to reach out to you, I had so much, we had such a good class when we did such and such. I've now received funding from the such and such, and we have copies of this book. It's a collection of poetry. Here it is, I'll send you a copy, blah, blah, blah. And usually they say yes. And I think the reason they say yes now is because, like, they know who I am. I'm not, you know. And sometimes I've brought books, and they've been books that we at Southeastern are using as our common read. So all of the gen ed students are reading it, things like that. Next year, our plan is to use the autobiography of Frederick Douglass as our big read book. So we'll see what happens with that. I can tell you a trick too. Everything has to be in the package from the publisher. That's what they say. And so what this means is that now I just have a publisher's box like in my trunk, and I just throw stuff in there. I'm like pens, pencils, note cards, whatever. And I mean, nothing, no contraband or anything, but like it's in the publisher's box, you know. And they usually, they know before I get there what I'm going to have, and I stick exactly to that list. Like, I don't change anything at the last minute. So.
Hi.
Hi.
So this is not a question that I'm trying to say to make myself sound smart.
Okay.
Just to preface.
But I was a thing that I keep, because like we're sisters, we're from here, and there's this, you know, I gravitate towards Southern stuff, if you will. And recently I read the famous book by Donna Tartt from Mississippi.
Which one?
Secret History?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so then she was saying in some interview that she thinks every artist from the South is somewhat of a spiritual exile. And so I started thinking about that. I mean, you know, what is that? Is that true? And then I was kind of thinking, I just looked up this quotation, and again, I'm not smart, from Joan Didion, where she's kind of describing New Orleans, and she describes it as kind of a place where all motion slows into choreography, reflecting a culture dominated by rank and old malevolent. And I was like, shoot, well, maybe every artist in the South is a spiritual exile.
I don't know if I'm a spiritual exile, but I'm for sure a literal exile because I was educated uptown New Orleans and I went to all the schools, right? But I lived on the West Bank, on the poor side, on the Yat side, and so I always felt separate. Like if you're going to a sleepover at someone's house and they have a butler and an elevator, and like in my house we had commodities cheese sandwiches, it's a different, and it's kind of a double life. Like I can't let on that I'm like, oh my God, they have, look at all this, you know. I can't let on how awed I am by that. But so I always felt a little other, I guess. I am a deeply spiritual person. I don't know that I would be embraced in some of my former spiritual homes, I guess, like in the Catholic school or whatever, but I don't feel exiled. I think there's a lot of different ways to get to where you're going.
Right.
So I don't know if I really answered your question at all.
Oh,
No.
yeah. No, I get it.
Sorry,
No, it's
I'm a poet. That's my excuse for
First of all, thank you. That was really beautiful. I wanted to ask about the Cento poems.
Mhm.
Like, I thought that was really powerful, knowing that all of that had been written by incarcerated persons. I guess I was wondering how you approach like attribution and like, I guess just the ethics of like, there's a lot of power in there. But, you know, I don't know exactly how to ask that. But I was just curious. Kind of
No, I get you, and I hear you. And so, like, number one is, it's, like, I don't have the names of the authors credited, which is by intent. One of the things I would like to do is to create an intra-institutional publication of creative work of people incarcerated in Louisiana, and that's so many obstacles because, I mean, there are still victims of crimes walking around like with real, so it's a rat's nest. But and maybe it's because I'm a poet, I'm just kind of always following what feels right, and it felt to me that it was important enough to get these voices out there that I was doing something. So on the poster you can see, I mean, it has a note on there about how the poems are made and everything like that. And I'm never, like, I'm not selling these or anything, or it wouldn't appear in my own personal book, right? Because it's not mine. I mean, I cut the lines in strips of paper and went like this, but it's not, it doesn't feel, I don't feel ownership over it, and I don't want to take ownership over it. So it's definitely a gray area.
Well, it sounded like you said that they were giving you these poems. And
Oh, for sure.
I want this out.
Yeah, like, I would say, if you want me to share your work outside of print, like, so when I show you those pictures, like, I have permission for that. Like, and it's not gonna hold up in court, like, I didn't get a document signed, but someone trusted me with it and said, yes, I give this to you. So, and I try to live up to, you know, I've had people ask me to sign these posters before, and I'm like, that's not really a thing that I want to do, because it doesn't feel right, so.
Anyone else? How early did you start writing poetry?
Like,
What age were you?
oh gosh, I mean, I started writing, I used to write stories, and I started in second grade, because I can remember what tennis shoes I had, and it was the second grade tennis shoes. And my stories were all about mice, and they were all the length of a memo tablet, and then whatever was happening on the last page, that's where it ended. So I think everyone else goes the opposite. They start with poetry and then realize no one buys poetry, so I should write fiction. And mine was the opposite. So I started that at a young age, but I didn't start seriously writing poetry until I got in college. And I had a really grouchy fiction writer as my teacher. His name is Tim Gautreaux, and he's heard me tell this story, so he knows he's a grouch. And I was scared to death of him, but he ended up being a really great mentor of mine. And anyway, good writing is good writing. Like, I don't think you only need to learn from a poet or only from a fiction writer. A good phrase is a good phrase, and whoever can teach me that, I want to learn.
What have been your biggest influences then in terms of both poets, fiction, any of that?
My most influential teacher for sure was a man named Jim Whitehead. He was my professor at the University of Arkansas. He was a football player. He was a lineman. I mean, in his youth. He was not in his youth when I knew him. And he just kind of took up a whole room and forced you to see things his way. And he took my poems really seriously, and he taught me how to take them seriously. We used to go in his office and go through line by line, and he would just call me to task for every word I wrote down. And I still have that in my brain, you know, when I'm trying to work on something. So as a teacher, I would say Jim Whitehead. As far as what I'm reading, I can only tell you like what I'm deep into right now. And somewhat you already mentioned Tahimba Jess. I will be ever paying homage to that book because Olio, because it's so brilliant. I just can't, I get a brain bleed just thinking of how brilliant it is. So that's one, and it's so inspirational. The subject, it's so brilliant. I'm a huge fan of C.D. Wright, and she has a book called One Big Self, and it's all about her trips to Louisiana State Prison with the photographer Deborah Luster. They would photograph the men there in portrait style, in old-fashioned portrait style, and then give them these old linotypes of their family. The Historic New Orleans collection has the full series of these images, by the way. And so, anyway, C.D. Wright wrote poems about that, as well as about everything. So she's a huge one on my list. In my car, I have Larry Levis's newest book, or it's his complete collected poems, Swirl and Vortex, so that's one I love. And, I'm a fan of Mary Ruefle. I like talkie poets, too, like Barbara Hamby, and she does a lot of interesting things with form and with the sonnet that I'm interested in. So I have too many interests, but I like it.
Pretty typical for creatives, right?
Yeah.
All right, are there any other questions? Thank you so much, Allison. Thank you, everyone. She has 4 books out there?
I've got 4 books.
She's got 4 books out there. So go out there, buy her books, and we are about to have our author signing right now. So go buy your books and head to the author signing table. Come back at 6:30 for a protest history of the United States with Dr. Gloria J. Brown Marshall.
It's in the other room, right? Brittany?
Yes.
Brittany, it's in the other
It's
room?
next door.
Yes, okay.